At 16:58, she closed her laptop, exactly 2 minutes before the official end of the workday. By 17:12, her photo, taken from a hallway security camera, was circulating in an HR email sent to every department. What nobody realized yet was that the image itself had just triggered a clause buried deep inside her contract. The clock on the office wall had the quiet authority of a judge. 16:57. Rows of desks stretched under cool fluorescent lights, the kind that made everything look slightly too pale. Faces, documents, even ambition. The late afternoon hum of keyboards and air vents blended into the familiar soundtrack of corporate patience. She glanced once more at the small digital clock in the corner of her screen. 16:58, 2 minutes early. Technically. Not that it mattered. Her tasks were complete, the last report submitted, the spreadsheet reconciled down to the final decimal. Her calendar showed nothing but white space for the remaining minutes of the day. Still, offices had their own unwritten rituals. Leaving early, even by 2 minutes, could feel like stepping off stage before the curtain closed. She shut the laptop gently. Not a snap. Not a statement. Just a quiet click. Across the aisle, someone from finance lifted their eyes for half a second. No judgment. Just curiosity. She slipped her notebook into her bag. Another small sound. Another small movement. And yet, something about the moment felt oddly visible. The hallway outside the department was long and glass-lined, reflecting fragments of people walking past. She stepped into it with the soft confidence of someone who had followed every rule. Behind her, the office lights hummed like distant electricity in the sky. 16:59. By the time the elevator doors closed, the day felt already over. Or at least it should have. At 17:12, the HR email left the server. The subject line was crisp, almost cheerful in its administrative clarity. Workplace discipline reminder. Inside the message sat a single photograph. A still frame pulled from the hallway security camera. There she was, mid-step, bag over her shoulder, walking toward the elevator. The timestamp in the corner glowed quietly. 16:58. Below the image, the message read, "Employees are reminded that leaving the workplace before the official end of the workday constitutes a violation of internal attendance policy." The email did not mention her name. It didn't have to. The photo was large enough. The hallway was recognizable enough. And the company mailing list, every department, every floor, was wide enough. By 17:14, the first replies began. Not directly to HR, of course. Private messages, side chats, whispers inside digital channels. Is that from analytics? Looks like her. Wow, they actually sent a photo. The image traveled faster than policy ever did, a small ripple moving through the quiet lake of office routine. She was already halfway home when her phone vibrated. A colleague from compliance had sent a message with only 3 words. "Did you see?" Below it, the screenshot, the email, the photograph. For a moment, she simply looked at it. Not shocked, not angry, just still. Even the late afternoon sunlight sliding across the train window seemed to pause with her. The photo was clear. Too clear. The camera angle, the lighting, the framing. Someone had deliberately cropped it for emphasis. Her face visible. Her posture unmistakable. The entire company watching a moment that had lasted less than 2 seconds. The strange thing was not the humiliation. It was the silence that followed. She didn't respond to the message, didn't type, didn't defend herself. Outside the train window, the city moved through its usual rhythm. Cars stopping at lights, people crossing streets, the world continuing with an indifference that offices rarely possessed. But something about the image lingered in her mind. Not the embarrassment. The camera. The hallway camera. She remembered signing the employment contract 2 years earlier. A thick document with sections nobody truly read carefully. Confidentiality, equipment policy, compliance guidelines. And somewhere in the middle of it, something else. Something about images, about corporate usage, about rights. The memory flickered like a distant light through fog. For the first time since receiving the message, her eyes narrowed slightly. She opened the email again, zoomed in on the photograph, the timestamp, the framing, the distribution list, every department, every employee. A quiet realization moved through her thoughts, slow and precise. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was publication. And publication inside a company had rules. Her train slowed at the next station. She stood, slipping the phone back into her pocket. Still silent. Still calm. Still saying nothing. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a small clause in a contract had just woken up. And if her memory about that clause was even remotely correct, this HR email had just become far more expensive than a 2-minute early exit. Somewhere in the contract archive, Section 11 was waiting to be read again. And once someone noticed it, the quiet office story of 1658 was about to change completely. Trust me, you'll want to see what happened when that clause finally surfaced. The next morning, the office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, the predictable perfume of corporate mornings. Screens flickered to life one by one. Chairs rolled across the floor. The rhythm of a new workday assembled itself piece by piece. But beneath that routine, something subtle had changed. People had seen the email. They had seen the photo. And the office, like a quiet theater before a performance, was now full of silent observers pretending not to watch. When she entered the building at 8:47, no one said anything directly. Yet the glances were there. Short. Curious, carefully neutral. The receptionist greeted her with the same polite smile as always, but her eyes lingered half a second longer than usual. The elevator doors slid closed. Inside, 2 employees from marketing stood quietly, pretending to scroll through their phones. One of them briefly looked up, then quickly looked away. The air felt thicker than usual. Not hostile, just attentive. She stepped out on her floor. The office lights hummed again, bright and indifferent. Her desk waited exactly as she had left it. Keyboard aligned, notebook closed, monitor dark. For a moment she stood there looking at the screen before turning it on. The login sound echoed softly, and then the inbox appeared. 17 unread messages. Most of them were ordinary. Meeting reminders, internal updates, a revised timeline from operations. But one message sat near the top of the list. HR, attendance policy clarification sent at 7:55. Her eyes rested on the subject line for a few seconds. Then she opened it. The email was short, professional, almost polite. Following yesterday's internal reminder regarding attendance policy, employees are expected to remain at their workstations until the official end of the workday. No apology, no correction, and the photo from yesterday remained attached. Still there, still visible, still sent to every department. For a moment, she leaned back in her chair. The office around her continued moving. Phones ringing, keyboards tapping, quiet conversations drifting through the air like background noise in a distant cafe. But inside her mind, another process had started. Slow, methodical. She opened a folder on her desktop. Employment documents. Inside it were scanned copies of the contract she had signed 2 years earlier. Most employees never opened those files again after onboarding. She had kept them organized. A habit from a previous job where documentation had often meant the difference between chaos and clarity. She clicked the file. The contract appeared. 43 pages of careful language and numbered sections. Clauses stacked like bricks in a legal wall. Confidentiality. Work equipment. Internal communications. Her cursor moved down slowly, page after page, paragraph after paragraph. Around her, the office atmosphere remained unaware of what she was doing. A colleague walked past carrying a stack of folders. Someone laughed quietly near the coffee machine. Life inside the company continued like normal, but the contract kept scrolling. Page 18, page 19, and then, there it was, Section 11, Image rights and personal representation. She stopped scrolling, read the first line, then the second. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her calm gaze sharpened. The clause was clear, painfully clear. The employer may not publish, distribute, or otherwise circulate photographic or video material containing the employee's identifiable likeness for internal or external communication without prior written consent of the employee. Her finger tapped the desk once, softly. The clause continued. This restriction includes internal mailing lists, corporate presentations, training materials, or disciplinary communications, unless explicit written authorization has been granted. The office noise around her suddenly felt distant, almost muted. She opened the HR email again, looked at the photograph, the hallway, the timestamp, her face. Then she looked at the distribution list. Every department, hundreds of recipients. She didn't smile, didn't react dramatically. She simply opened another window. Legal counsel, corporate advisory. The company used an external legal firm for contract matters. Employees rarely contacted them directly, but technically, they were allowed to. Her message was short, professional, no emotion, just 3 attachments. The HR email, the photograph, page 19 of her contract. Subject line, question regarding Section 11, Image Rights Clause. She reread the email once, then clicked send. The message left her computer at 9:14, and just like that, the story of 1658 quietly changed direction. The office around her still believed the situation was simple. An employee left early. HR made an example. Case closed. But contracts were strange things. They waited silently until someone actually read them. And once the right eyes reviewed Section 11, this entire situation would no longer belong to HR. It would belong to the law. She closed the contract file and returned to her spreadsheet. Calm, focused, silent. Across the office, someone whispered, "Did she respond to the email?" No one knew yet, but 5 hours later, when the legal review finally came back, the silence inside the company would become very different. Because what counsel discovered inside Section 11 wasn't just a mistake, it was a breach. And breaches in contracts rarely end quietly. If you've ever seen someone publicly shamed at work for something small, what do you think should happen when the company crosses the line instead? Share your thoughts below. At 9:14, the email left her inbox. No announcement, no visible reaction. Just a quiet digital departure toward a legal office 20 kilometers away. Inside the company, however, the story of 1658 continued to ripple through departments like a rumor that had learned how to walk on its own. By 10:30, the image had appeared in 3 different internal chat threads. Not officially, of course not. But screenshots have a way of slipping through corporate walls. Someone in marketing had circled the timestamp with a red marker. Someone in logistics had written under it, 2 minutes early. That's brutal. Another message followed. HR really went nuclear with this one. The office air felt charged with a quiet curiosity. Not malicious, just the strange fascination that people develop when someone else becomes the center of an internal story. And yet the person in the photo was sitting only 15 meters away, working, typing, updating a report. She hadn't said a word about the email. That silence alone made people uncomfortable. Most employees in her position would have reacted immediately, defended themselves, complained, at least sent a reply to HR. But she did none of those things. Instead, she worked as if the entire situation belonged to another department entirely. And somehow, that calmness made the hallway conversations grow louder. At 11:07, the first unexpected development happened. The head of HR received a message from legal. Short, neutral, but unusual. Please confirm whether the employee depicted in yesterday's disciplinary email has provided written consent for internal distribution of the image. The HR manager frowned at the screen. It was not a question she had expected. The disciplinary email had been routine, at least in her mind. a reminder to reinforce attendance culture. The photograph had simply been evidence, a visual reminder. She typed back quickly. No written consent. Image taken from internal security camera. Send. A few minutes passed. Then another message arrived, this time slightly longer. Understood. Please forward the original email distribution list and confirm the number of recipients. The HR manager leaned back in her chair. Something about the tone of the request felt procedural, not accusatory, but careful. She opened the original message. The distribution list scrolled across the screen. Finance, marketing, operations, engineering, support, administration, every department, 212 recipients. She forwarded the list to legal. For a moment, she considered asking why they needed it, but corporate instinct told her something simple. When legal asks for information, you provide it first. Questions come later. At 12:18, the office cafeteria filled with the usual lunchtime murmur. Conversations bounced softly between tables. Weekend plans, project deadlines, harmless gossip. At a small table near the window, two employees from compliance were discussing the email. Did you see legal contacted HR? One of them whispered. The other raised an eyebrow. About the photo? Yeah. They paused. Something about that fact made the story feel slightly heavier. Legal departments rarely involve themselves in attendance reminders. Across the cafeteria, she sat alone with a notebook beside her lunch tray. Calm, unbothered, as if none of this belonged to her. One of the compliance employees glanced toward her table. She seems very relaxed. The other one shrugged. Maybe she doesn't realize how serious HR meant that email. Neither of them knew the message she had sent that morning. Neither of them knew about Section 11. But somewhere else in the city, a legal associate had just finished reading that clause for the third time. And the more he read it, the quieter his office became. At 13:47, the reply arrived. Her inbox chimed once. Just a single message. From legal counsel. Subject line. Section 11, Image Rights Clause. She opened it. The response contained only 3 sentences. We have reviewed the materials you provided. The internal distribution of the photograph appears to violate Clause Section 11 of your employment agreement. We recommend documenting all related communication while we contact the company regarding corrective measures. For a moment, she simply looked at the screen. Outside the office windows, clouds were moving slowly across the afternoon sky like quiet witnesses. She closed the message, returned to her work. Still silent, still composed. But somewhere on another floor of the building, legal had just scheduled a call with HR. And when that call happened, the conversation would shift away from attendance policies and toward contract breach. In offices like this, stories usually moved upward slowly. Whispers, emails, meetings. But once legal departments started asking questions, the pace could change very quickly. And the quiet photograph from 1658 had just begun a conversation that HR was no longer controlling. The real silence was coming later. By 15:02, the atmosphere inside the HR department had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough that people could feel it. The HR manager sat at her desk reviewing a familiar screen, the same disciplinary email she had sent the day before. It had seemed harmless at the time. A reminder, a demonstration, a small enforcement of workplace discipline. Now the message felt different. Legal had requested the distribution list. Legal had asked about consent. Legal had scheduled a call. And when legal scheduled calls in the middle of the workday, the word routine usually disappeared from the situation. The conference room on the 4th floor was small and glass-walled. Neutral chairs, a table too polished for comfort. The kind of room where conversations became official simply by happening inside it. At 15:17, the call began. On one side of the table sat the HR manager and a senior operations supervisor. On the screen appeared the company's external legal counsel. The lawyer adjusted his glasses slightly. His tone was calm, professional, but there was a certain quiet precision in the way he spoke, the voice of someone who had already read the document in question several times. "Thank you for joining," he began. "I'd like to clarify a detail regarding the disciplinary email sent yesterday at approximately 1712. The HR manager nodded. "Yes, of course." He continued, "Specifically, the photograph included in that message." The screen reflected the email on his side of the call. The hallway, the timestamp, 1658. For the first time since sending it, the image looked less like evidence and more like documentation. The lawyer spoke again. "Can you confirm that the employee depicted did not grant written consent for the distribution of her image?" The HR manager hesitated only briefly. "That's correct. The image was taken from a security camera." The lawyer nodded once. Then he clicked something on his screen. A document appeared beside the email. "Employment Agreement, Section 11. He read aloud, slowly. "The employer may not publish, distribute, or otherwise circulate photographic or video material containing the employee's identifiable likeness for internal or external communication without prior written consent." Silence filled the conference room. Not heavy, just undeniable. The HR manager leaned forward slightly. "But this was an internal reminder," she said carefully, "not publication." The lawyer tilted his head slightly. "Internal mailing lists count as distribution under the language of this clause." He scrolled further. "And the email was sent to 212 recipients." The number hung in the room for a moment. Even the operations supervisor shifted in his chair. The lawyer continued, his voice still perfectly even. "Additionally, the clause explicitly mentions disciplinary communications as restricted contexts unless authorization has been provided." Another pause. Another quiet page turning. Which, according to the information provided, it was not. For the first time that afternoon, the HR manager felt something unfamiliar creep into the edges of the conversation. Not panic, but recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when a situation moves from policy enforcement into contractual exposure. She folded her hands together. "What are you suggesting we do?" The lawyer didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize the moment. He simply answered, "The company should immediately retract the email and issue a correction." He paused again. "And the employee may be entitled to remedies depending on how the clause is interpreted." The room fell quiet. In offices like this, silence had many different meanings. Sometimes it meant disagreement, sometimes confusion. But this silence meant something simpler: calculation. Across the building, the person at the center of the entire discussion sat calmly finishing a report. She had not contacted HR. She had not confronted anyone. She had not even mentioned the email. Yet the conversation happening in the conference room existed entirely because of one decision she had made that morning. Send 3 documents to legal. Nothing more. Nothing less. At 16:10, the meeting ended. By 16:18, the HR manager returned to her desk. She opened the original disciplinary email again. The photo looked different now. Not evidence. Not discipline. Just a small image attached to a message that had quietly crossed a legal boundary. Her cursor hovered over the message controls. For a long moment, she did nothing. Then she opened a new email draft. Subject line: "Correction, previous HR communication." Across the office floor, people continued their normal work. No one knew the meeting had happened. No one knew the company was about to rewrite yesterday's narrative. And the woman in the photograph was still typing quietly at her desk, unaware that somewhere in HR a retraction email had just begun to take shape. What nobody in the office understood yet was that the real shift was not the correction. It was the realization that a simple hallway image had quietly reversed the direction of authority inside the company. And once that realization spread, the silence that followed would feel very different from the one that started it all. At 16:41, the new email left the HR department. Unlike the previous one, It carried a noticeably different tone. The subject line alone hinted at the shift. Correction, previous HR communication. Within seconds, it began appearing across the same inboxes that had received yesterday's message. Finance, marketing, operations, engineering, administration, the identical distribution list. 212 recipients. Inside the message, there was no photograph, no hallway, no timestamp, only text. Yesterday, an internal message was distributed regarding workplace attendance policy. The communication included an image taken from a security camera. The next line arrived like a quiet reversal of gravity. After internal legal review, the company acknowledges that the distribution of this image did not comply with the image rights clause contained in the employee's contract. Some employees blinked when reading that sentence. Others reread it. A few quietly leaned back in their chairs. The office, which had spent the past 24 hours discussing someone leaving 2 minutes early, suddenly had a new topic: legal review, contract clause, non-compliance. The email continued. The previous message is hereby withdrawn. We apologize for the distribution of the image and for any misunderstanding it may have caused. And just like that, the narrative changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. In the analytics department, someone whispered first. Wait, they retracted it? Another employee opened the original screenshot stored in a chat thread. The hallway image, 1658. Now it looked strangely fragile, like a piece of evidence that had already lost its authority. Across the room, someone muttered quietly, "So, HR actually violated the contract?" No one answered immediately, but the question itself traveled quickly through desks and conversations. She read the correction email at 1644, 3 minutes after it arrived. Her reaction was almost invisible. A slight pause, a small breath. Nothing else. The office around her hummed as usual. Printers starting up, chairs moving, quiet conversations beginning to adjust their direction. But inside the digital space of the company, the tone had shifted completely. Yesterday, she had been the example. Today, the email itself had become the example. She closed the message and returned to the spreadsheet in front of her. Numbers aligned neatly in rows, formulas executed perfectly. Everything exactly as it should be. After a moment, a notification appeared on her screen. Legal counsel 1 new message. She opened it. The company has issued a correction acknowledging the clause. If you wish, we can proceed with a formal request for damages related to unauthorized image distribution. She read the sentence twice, then typed a short reply. Thank you for the review. At this time, a correction is sufficient. Send. The response traveled quietly back to the legal office. No negotiation, no escalation, no revenge, just a quiet decision. At 1657, the office clock returned to its familiar authority. Employees glanced at it the same way they always did. Waiting, watching, preparing to close laptops and pack bags. At 1658, she finished the last line of her report. A small coincidence. Or perhaps just timing. This time, when she closed her laptop, no one looked up. No emails appeared. No photographs circulated. The hallway camera still recorded silently above the corridor, but it had suddenly become irrelevant. Contracts had a way of doing that. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They simply waited for someone to read them. She walked toward the elevator with the same calm step as the day before. The fluorescent lights hummed. The glass walls reflected fragments of movement. The elevator doors opened. And somewhere behind her, 2 employees from marketing were whispering near the printers. Is that the woman from the email yesterday? The other one nodded slowly. Yeah. A small pause. Then a quiet realization. She didn't even say anything. And HR had to apologize. The elevator doors closed gently. Down the hallway, the office continued its routine. But the story had already changed shape. Yesterday, it had been about leaving at 1658. Today, it had become something else entirely. A reminder that sometimes the quietest response inside an office carries the strongest authority. And sometimes the loudest message a company sends is the one it later has to take back.